Speakers, dear guests, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. Welcome to WWF Climate Communication Side Event, from Heatwave to Hot Actions, the power of public communication on climate. This side event is co-hosted by WWF and the Climate Reality Project. I am Lun Yan, CEO of WWF China, and I will be the moderator of this side event today. As you all have been aware, the greenhouse gas emissions reached a new high in 2020. In September this year, global average temperature were 1.8 degrees above pre-industrial levels. The 2023 edition of the Emission Gap Report finds that fully implementing and continuing mitigation efforts of unconditional nationally determined contributions made under the Paris Agreement for 2030 would put the world on course for limiting temperature rise to 2.9 degrees this century. Fully implementing conditional NDCs would lower this to 2.5 degrees. Extreme weathers are expected to happen more frequently and bring more disasters. Are people fully aware of this? Do we have enough voices on zero-emission development? Can the public influence national and global policies? How different are the public climate communications across countries? This event is expected to build up a platform for climate and communication experts from different countries and cultures to exchange ideas and experiences on how to turn climate change issues and crises into public joint efforts. Today we have 7 speakers. They are Dr. Adil Najam, the president of WWF International; Manuel Pulgar Vidal, the global leader of climate and energy at WWF, and also interim chair of IUCN Climate Crisis Commission; Ms. Phyllis Coutinho, President and CEO of the Climate Reality Project; Mr. Wu Qi, Chief Editor of One Way Street Journal; Dr. Simon Evans, Senior Policy Editor of Carbon Brief; Mr. Chen Qiufan, writer and research scholar of Yale University; Ms. Qi Yue, Climate Manager of Children's Investment Fund Foundation. Before giving the stage to Dr. Adil, please allow me briefly introduce him. Dr. Adil is a leading public scholar whose teaching, research, and public engagement focus on global public policy, especially those related to conservation and environment, sustainable and human developments, and the climate change in the global south. Let's welcome Dr. Adil to open the event.
Thank you. Thank you so much, and thank you for having me here, and thank you for doing this. Thank you for doing this, and thank you for doing this on the first day of this COP, because I think that this is one of those topics that we really need to think about in a serious fashion. We think about it a lot. I think in some ways we do more we by meaning the planet as a whole, everyone does more communication than ever before. And sometimes communication sort of takes over from even the substance of what we do. But I don't think we think enough about it. There is this panic, this partly driven, I think, by technology and especially social media, that you can't not be there and therefore just jump in and do whatever. So I'm particularly looking forward to the folks who will be speaking after me who know much, much more about this. But since you've given me this opportunity, let me start with a little personal statement. In the previous panel, when I was here, I mentioned that I worked on climate from the beginning of my career, which was not exactly true, because even before that, my very first job out of after college, my title was communication officer. This was 1989. The very first thing I ever published, and I believe it is still in print, is a policy paper, pretty thick, for IUCN. So I was communication officer for IUCN. And the title of that paper was Communicating Conservation. So this is since then, all I've done is sort of waste paper by writing a lot. But that was the first thing. So I've been trying to think about this for a long time. And I want to raise 3 questions, maybe, not challenges, for us to think about, and I'm sure other speakers will have much better. We think about communication in many ways. We think about it in terms of technology. We do that very often. You know, technology will change, and Instagram will no longer be Instagram, and something else will come, and what's the newest thing, and how are people scrolling, and what does scrolling do as opposed to looking that. So all of that. That I don't worry about, because I think it's in safe hands. There are lots of people who think about it. People think about it in terms of audiences and how audiences change, and that also I do not worry about as much, because I think it is in safe hands. People who know things think about it. I think people think a lot about content. That also I do not worry about, because people are obsessed with that. So I am sure there are better people than me who are looking at it. So what do I worry about? 3 things. And very briefly, I will highlight them and then shut up. 3 things. First, how is communication changing or could change our relationship with nature, and how we think about that relationship with nature? Right? It's a message question. The second is, how does it change or could change our relationship with truth? And the third is, how is it or how could it change our relationship with young people? Right? And that's more than an audience question. So I'll just say a few sentences about all 3. Most importantly, about relationship with nature. WWF, I think, sort of historically has benefited greatly from its, very focused communication strategy. We choose our pictures carefully. We choose our messaging carefully. There is a certain image. We put pandas on our shirts, right? So there's a very crafted message. And that message has created, great goodwill for us. But as we keep thinking about it, this question keeps coming up: what is our relationship with nature? How does climate change in particular force us to rethink that relationship with nature, right? Because the relationship with nature has clearly now gone to something bigger than cute and cuddly animals, right? We still do cute and cuddly. But what is that relationship with nature? If I ask you, I at least ask my students, think of a picture that would represent climate and nature. What would that picture be? The first picture that comes to mind. You have to put a picture on a poster, climate and nature. What would it be? It's extreme weather. Okay, so that's one, right. Extreme weather, we can unpack that, but let me unpack another one which often comes up, which is the polar bear on the slab of ice. Right? That's the one many of my students first come up with, polar bear on slab of ice. And I have this amazing odd relationship with that picture, because I love the picture. On the other hand, the picture keeps telling me there is a polar bear in the middle of the ocean, stranded, waiting for me to come and save it. And that's not an honest statement, because I've spoken to a few polar bears, and they're not waiting. Right? That's not how nature works. In fact, when the polar bears come at their COP, they worry about us. Right? This species that can't take care of itself and is busy killing each other is not the best candidate for saving other species, right? If these polar bears were talking. But the reason I mention that is our relationship with nature going to be, or is it evolving on an arrogance of us as a super species? or the humility of us as a species amongst others, right? Better endowed and therefore needing to be more responsible. Right? And that, I think, is a story that is constantly being crafted every time you craft a message. I do think that we've gone too far in us being projected by ourselves as a super arrogant species whose responsibility is to somehow save every other. But I raised that just as a question. As I said, I don't want to go too much. The second is truth. And again, I'm just going to do the headlines, and they're better people than me. The second is our relationship with truth. And again, we talk a lot about it. What is special about that relationship in climate? I work on climate like many of you. And climate has moved from, when I started working on this 30 some years ago, people said, climate what? And now suddenly I'm cool. Everyone wants to talk climate. And I'm not sure I'm totally happy about it. And the relationship with truth is, I think the key word there is the challenge of exaggeration. Right? The case for climate is being made by climate. And yet when I sometimes tell my stories, I get overboard, right? By highlighting the story and exaggerating. And then I push back and I worry that, okay, one of these days someone is going to push back and say, you guys were saying this, and it wasn't exactly like that, because we have moved in the climate discussion. So this is other than all the other truth, fake facts, and all that stuff is separate. But we've moved from a point where our communication challenge was getting people interested in our issue, which is a different, I think, communication challenge, to the communication challenge today, which is getting people to act on a conviction that they actually have. Right? And therefore, if facts and images and stories are weapons, how we use it is important. And the last one is youth or young people. Right? And again, there is lots of things that all of you know much better than I could ever know of young people as an audience. But here is the one I worry about. Here is fact one. Everyone in this room, not just the young people, but especially the young people, everyone in this room is going to be less young when I'm done speaking than you were when I started. That's a fact of life. So therefore, this is one of the most transient of those categories. Old people are going to remain old people, just become older. Young people are no longer going to remain young, and another set of young people will come. Right? But my challenge on the young people that I would love to learn about is a different one. We seem to know that young people today are more concerned, more informed, more interested, more passionate about environment in general, climate in particular, than ever before. They're actually ready consumers for climate communication. They're eager to take it in. What we do not know, and I have a suspicion that the answer, unfortunately, may not be a good one, is whether young people today, through their actions, are actually more aware and more do they act more profoundly to what they say, right? I live in the US. I see those Amazon trucks coming to the same house 6 times, right? And I raise this question, I teach, therefore I raise this question to my students. If that Amazon truck, if you have Amazon Prime, this is not about Amazon, but if you have Amazon Prime, essentially you have signed up to unending consumption. And that emission from that truck is not the truck driver's, it's yours. If you have Uber Eats and are very proud that you don't own a car and use Uber, the emission from that Uber is not the driver's, it's yours, right? So again, I'm babbling here, so I'll end, but the point I'm trying to raise with this is, as we tell our stories, we clearly are making young people more aware. We clearly are making them more passionate. We clearly are making them more activist. But the real test also has to be, have we actually influenced the behavior of this future generation enough that it will actually make a difference in bending that curve? I hope it will. I thank you for the time, and I thank you for the opportunity to have me here. I look forward very much to learning from everyone. Thank you.
Thank you, Adil. Actually, I personally, I myself not aware that you were a communication officer from the very beginning. Thank you. Dr. Adil raised the 3 questions and also mentioned the purpose of climate communication, not only get people interested into about the issue, but also actions. Let's welcome Manuel, our practice lead, to give us the keynote speech. Welcome, Manuel.
Thank you very much. I am so glad, so happy to be here to talk about communications, the power of communications, and how to connect communication with the youth movement. So let me share with you 3 main ideas. The first one, it is based on what you have just said, Adil. The best communicator for climate change, it's climate change. That is clear. Through nature, it is true, and through climate events. So if you try to speak with different people, different generations about climate change, the best way to do it, it is by explaining the extreme climate events that unfortunately it is more frequently happening. But, and there is a but, the way it is to use that extreme climate event and to talk about the system, the connections. That is a key element. It is not about the event, it is about the system. Because by doing that, everybody can understand well how the planet is used to working and how much by affecting any of the element of the system, we can affect the whole of the planet. So for example, now we have new diseases because there are new vectors of those diseases in many places. No? How much the presence of those vectors are related to climate change, or how much the alteration of the sea current it's affecting climate, it's affecting crops, it's affecting economic activities, and it's affecting livelihoods. All of that is systemic. So that is the best way to explain. And it is interesting because I am used to thinking that there are just 2 virtues on climate change. The first one, that we can explain it because of its climate events. And the second one, it is that nobody, fortunately, nobody can attribute to know everything about climate change. So that obliges us to think on climate change in a cross and interdisciplinary way. And that is fantastic, because the only way to address well climate change consequences, it is by bringing all kinds of expertise, background, skills, all together to try to see how can we solve that problem. And that is good, because it is by that cross-pollination dialogue that we will see how can we do that. So that is my first idea. Let's climate to speak. Let's climate to communicate. And let's use those events to talk about the system. Second idea, go to the roots of the definition of climate change. I am professor. I used to lecture climate change some years ago in Lima, in Peru, my country. And it is interesting, when you go back to the definition of climate change, you can explain almost everything to different generations. You can go to a school, you can use the definition of climate change even to explain this process, the process of a COP, but all the dynamic of the climate talks. So let me use that example. So if you think, what is the definition of climate change? The first one, it is increase of the temperature average of the planet, average temperature of the planet. And by saying that, you can talk about the 1.1, that it is the level of temperature raising that we have produced by now. You can talk about the 1.5, that it is the threshold. You can talk about 2.8, that it is the situation that we can produce by keeping the current trend, and you can discuss all around temperature. So the first element of the definition, it is key, And by talking about temperature rising, you can explain what is the problem. And by doing that, then you can have, as in WWF, this phrase, 1.5 to stay alive. That I think it's a fantastic phrase because it's communicating. It is saying to the people that that is the limit, that we shouldn't go above that limit. 1.5, it is the limit of temperature rising to keep life on Earth. So that is the first element of the definition. The second element of the definition, it is caused because of greenhouse gases emission. Because again, not everybody knows exactly what does it means. No? And so when you talk about greenhouse gases and you go one by one, at least with the first two, the easiest one, no? Carbon dioxide, and why? Who is producing carbon dioxide emissions? No? The burning of fossil fuels, mostly the burning of fossil fuels, but even the burning of forests or the deforestation. And you can start to connect all of those things. And you can go after that to methane, no? And explain how much the organic materials can produce methane emissions, and even some oil exploration and exploitation can produce the same. So that is the second element of the definition. That moves me to the third, and the third, it is caused by men, caused by people. It is a human production of these greenhouse gases emission. To differentiate what? Climate change with climate variability. No? Because you know that events as phenomenon El Niño, it is not because of climate change. We are suffering more impact, more frequency of El Niño because of climate change. But the origin, it is not climate change. Because that is very common. Now we are close to have a strong Niño, at least in our coast in South America. And everybody is confusing. El Niño is climate change, so this is because of climate change. We have a cyclone, it was because of climate change. So there are all of those kind of confusion. Even in the north with the polar vortex. The polar vortex, it is a climate variability event. But its frequency and its impact, it has been aggravated because of climate change. So that is the third element of the equation. And the fourth, it is mostly in the beginning of burning of fossil fuels, the second phase of the Industrial Revolution. No? And then you can explain why it is so urgent to phase out fossil fuels, and how should we do with coal, no? With heavy oils, and then until getting natural gas by the end. But what urgent and why it is so important to have politicians taking decisions to phasing out of fossil fuels. And finally, all of this is creating extreme events. And again, that moves you to the system. Because it is interesting. Probably we have heavy rains, floods as the most common climate events, but are not the only one. You can immediately connect with social livelihood, or you can connect immediately with economic activities. I am from Peru. Know what it could be the economic damages because of climate change if we strongly depend on hydro source of energy, no? And water scarcity could affect that source of energy. Or we have a very rich ocean in which most of the fisheries, it is based in the cold current. What it could happen if that temperature of the current, of the sea change, what it could happen with all that big group of people who is depending on that economic activity. So go always to the root. It is the best way to explain to the whole society, and mostly to the child and to the young people. And that moves me to my third point. And my third point, it is about the youth movement. You refer also, Adil, to that. Sometimes when I talk with people representing the youth movement, it is repeating the same as adults. And I am always thinking, you must to develop your own narrative. You are the young people. You have your own ways of behaving. You have your own ways to communicate. You know, as Adil mentioned, that you will take decisions soon. You will take control of this process. And I am sure that you can do it better than us. But the point it is that by now, you have to communicate not only within the youth movement, but also to the adults, that you are a key actor. You are not just a movement. You are, as an economic actor, the youth movement must be an actor with their own narrative and with their own demand. That is key. And for sure, you can connect that narrative to your ability to work with social media. Because this event, it is to talk also about what are those tools that you can count as a way to communicate it better. So you can use the social media, Instagram, TikTok, all of that I don't know too much how to use. That is the way to communicate. But there are not too many or too much information in the social media because of the youth movement on climate change. You have to create that dynamic to make climate change part of the social media information that people can receive, that people can be more aware not only on what is happening, but also to understand the reasons of what it is happening and what is that level of decision that we have to take in this kind of events, the COP. Because let me finish by saying one thing. It is a bit sad. Sometimes when I am with friends in Lima and I tell them, I am coming to COP, no? What number? 28. 28? And what are you doing? Because things seems to be exactly the same as 20 years ago. Are you doing something? And it is sad, because for the common people, for the public audience, it is that we are not doing anything. And that is sad. So it is even more difficult to communicate what exactly are we doing, what kind of progress we are getting. It is true that we are going too slow, that we have to speed up this process. It is true. But also it is true, and probably that is something that we are not used to communicating well, that even if we take the better decisions now, all the damage that we have already created, it will join us for a century, at least for a century. Because sometimes people are thinking that by taking decisions now in COP28, in 2 years we will see the change. No. We have to know how to live in the current planet with all its challenges. And that is something that you have to communicate well. No? Because if not, you are creating a kind of false of hope. The idea it is that, for sure, we have to act now. We have to take decisions now. But the idea it is to give the planet the ability to adapt to the new conditions, no? As a way to avoid to have this kind of climate extreme events in the future. So that is a key element to be communicate, and we do need to have the voice of youth to do that. So thank you for giving me this opportunity. I know that you have 7 people, so I don't want to take more time. And unfortunately, I have to run to some other event, but thank you very much for inviting me. Thank you.
Thank you, Manuel. Manuel mentioned that use the climate extreme event to do the public communication, and basically you can use it to kick off the communication with all generations. And we are very lucky to have the Climate Reality Project here, and they are very good at and they're professional in climate communication. Let's welcome Ms. Feliz.
Thanks so much. It's wonderful to be back here at yet another COP. Yes, 28 of them. But it's also wonderful to be here with one of our long-term partners. It was in 2016 that we worked together in partnership to host a training, and I think it was more than 800 participants were trained together, and so we absolutely couldn't have done it without WWF China, and so to our friends, thank you. So climate leadership trainings is what we do. We are an organization that is all about education, and communication, but not just education and communication, but education and communication for mobilization. To Manuel's point, you know, we have to do more, and we do believe that people are being more productive in addressing the climate. So, you know, these climate leadership trainings, we host them all around the world. We've had 54 of them to date, and they're all led by our chairman and founder, former US Vice President Al Gore. And they are designed to do a lot of what Manuel talked about that needs doing. We break down the science and make it accessible in a variety of ways. First in language that's very accessible, but also in video and other content. We very much talk about the impacts of climate change. But we know there's despair, and so you can't just talk about the impacts, you have to talk about the solutions. And then, very importantly, we try to talk to people and teach them how to very effectively communicate themselves about the climate crisis to their friends, to their families, to their colleagues, because we want them to go out and evangelize. But finally, the thing that we want our participants to do, now 54,000 climate reality leaders from all around the world, what we want them to do is mobilize. Mobilize for impact. And so this topic, climate communications, is really at the heart, obviously, of what we do. Now, we all know that we need governments to act. That's most important, critically important. But we all have a role to play, whether or not it's in communications or whether or not it's in our personal actions, like checking that box that all of our deliveries come in one Amazon delivery rather than separate ones. We all have something to do. And it doesn't matter where you sit or where you stand, whether or not you are in a boardroom or a classroom, two professors before me, there is a role for everyone in climate communications. We all need to be engaged and involved and moving in the same direction to lower emissions. And we know that in communicating about the climate and the solutions, we can also communicate about the benefits of addressing climate change, creating good jobs, creating healthy economies, protecting human health and biodiversity. These are all the solution-driven benefits that come from climate change. And that has to be combined with the communications about the impacts. Now, we talked a little bit about kind of how you communicate with folks in terms of our content, which a lot of graphs, a lot of charts, a lot of video. Our founder likes to say a picture speaks 1,000 words, and it's really true. Because whether or not it's the polar bear or the impacts that you can visualize, it really helps people understand. And we believe that when we are talking about this and educating folks, if we're bringing it into their community, if they understand it from their local perspective, that is when we are most effective. So out of all of our trainings, built from the ground up around the world, 54 of them, we bring in business leaders, civil society leaders, folks from frontline communities to really tell the local story. And we found that we have a much greater success rate in moving people from education and communication to mobilization, which is how we solve the climate crisis, when they understand how climate change is impacting them in their backyard. So we work after these trainings through our 11 branch offices to get our volunteers really engaged in local, in regional, in national, in global efforts. And we believe that the way to do that is through campaigns, another form of communication. And so here's the 4 areas that we're working in. First, reducing emissions. There's no secret that we can only stop global warming if we stop burning fossil fuels. It's just that simple. So we're working to end the era of fossil fuels and speed the transition to clean energy. Second, we need to call out greenwashing, right? This is our opponents using communications against us. They spent years just trying to discredit climate science. They've spent years trying to block progress. Now they want us to believe that they're on our team and ready to lead the transition, and we don't believe them. And you shouldn't either. So at Climate Reality, we're here to call out industry, their miscommunication, their outright lies, to show the world that we can build a better future without fossil fuels. Third, we need to finance that just transition. Few sectors have the power to speed up the transition worldwide or hit the brakes, like global finance. That's a critical piece. So for decades, the global finance system has poured billions of dollars into oil and gas and coal projects around the world, and now we need to turn them to clean energy. And we need to make sure that, in particular, the Global South has access to the kind of funding that they need, right? We also need to make sure that wealthy nations, like my home country of the United States, don't just make pledges, but they honor them. They rarely deliver. So it's frankly time to do better, right? We're working to reform the global finance to spur that rapid energy transition that the planet needs and get to developing nations the fair credit that they need to adapt and to change their economies to clean energy economies that can thrive. So our fourth campaign, and the reason that so many of us are here in Dubai today is we need to strengthen international cooperation on climate. It's got to be done. And it's a global challenge and it needs global solutions. So that's why, again, we mobilize communities to build the political will for bold action that we need and to pressure leaders for the reductions that we must have and to honor their commitments and work together for a future without fossil fuels. So, you know, I think that we all have a role to play, whether or not we're communicating to governments, whether or not we're communicating again to students, whether or not we're communicating to our family, to colleagues. We all have a piece of the solution, and we'll only be successful if we all work together. So we look forward to continuing to work with you, and thanks for having me, and I look forward to the panel discussion. Thanks.
Thank you, Phyllis. I love your word, education and communication for mobilization. Now, I will give the stage to Wu Qi to kick off our panel discussion.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm very honored to be here, and I don't know why I'm here actually, because I'm not one of you guys. I mean, if you compare the profession or career in a very conventional way, but I guess that's the meaning of this topic. So thank you for WWF and Climate Reality Projects for having me and our panelists here to talk about the importance or the power of public climate communication. Actually, by introducing myself or by being here myself, it's a small example of why communication matters. Because my name is Wu Qi. I worked in an independent bookstore back in Beijing. We produce books, literature journals, sometimes podcasts and social media stuff. We talk about the beauty and evil of the world, but normally we didn't talk about the weather, about the climate at all, until we worked with WWF this year to initiate a small project called Regeneration. We had an open call for a young generation of Chinese authors and artists to work and create on the name or on the theme of regeneration. So we've received lots of works, and one of them actually presented here in the desk. So that particular project has brought me here, and I hope they brought our audience and readership here as well. They become part of the COP28. So that's my story. Let's introduce the panelists today. Start with Qi Yue from CIFF. Welcome. And Dr. Simon Evers from Carbon Brief. Welcome. And my colleague, Chen Qiufan from China. He's a famous young writer and one of the mentors for our projects here. I will start a very open and general question actually followed by the three keynote speakers. Why does the communication of climate change matters? And do we have enough public awareness upon this issue? If not, what else should we do or act? That's a question to three of you guys. Lady first. Sorry.
Thank you, Wu Qi, and thank you, WWF, for inviting me here. And this is my first day in Dubai and the first event. And I'm very happy to start my COP28, my 7th COP, with this very important and very interesting topic. And it really deserves the 2-hour long queue to collect my badge. So, yeah, and to those who are not very familiar with CIF, Children's Investment Fund Foundation, we are a philanthropic foundation headquartered in London, and we have regional offices in Beijing, in Delhi, in Nairobi, and also in Addis Ababa. By our name, you can tell that we have a specific focus on children's lives and children's welfare, and we know that climate change poses the biggest single risk to the future of our children and youth. So I think nowadays climate change is actually affecting everywhere in the world and everyone's daily life. So it's need everyone to take the actions to address this biggest challenge in globally nowadays. And I think communication has a unique role to play to raise the public awareness and to mobilize individuals to act. And actually, behavior change and lifestyle change is quite an untapped area with huge mitigation potential. According to some studies, we can achieve 40% to 70% emission reduction by 2050 through the behavior change. So this has highlighted the importance of the public communication work, and but we see there's still some gaps in this area, and not on behalf of CIF, just as an audience of public climate communication, I would say that the first thing I want to highlight is that when we talk about climate change, we also talk about very big stories. We talk about 200 years ago. We talk about by the end of this century, and like sea level rise, like glaciers melting. But for ordinary people, most of the people have no chance to see a real glacier in their life. So I think we need more people stories to tell what the real, maybe they even don't realize that their life is impacted by climate change. So we need to tell them, if you are a fisherman living in a coastal area, how climate change has impacted your town, and how it has impacted your livelihood, and what can you do to save the earth. So we need more people, like stories like that, to make people think about climate change and then act. And another gap is that I have to say I live in Beijing, and I think now it's improving, but I think in China climate change is not a very well-known topic. Like Wu Qi said, they don't talk about weather, climate change. But we know weather and climate change are not the same thing. But it's just the case. Once a U.S. colleague asked me, are there also many climate deniers in China when Trump was elected as a president? And I told them, no. Chinese people don't deny climate change. They don't know about and care about climate change. So that's the truth. I graduated from a college of environmental science. And my dear college friends, all of them, they don't know about climate change. Only one, that's my bad. I didn't train them. But the only time when one of my friends asked me about climate change, because Trump was twittering to deny climate change every day, and she lives in the US. So that's the reality, that middle-aged Chinese people don't know about climate change. So we really have a long way to go. And the third gap, I think, is that we need a lot of more professionals on public climate comms, and we have some role models here today. And I don't know how many of you were at COP20, the COP in Lima, and when the presidency, yes, I was then I was a cold-blood negotiator at Lima COP, but his speech has made me very. I can feel his passion, and I mean, it's made the whole plenary everyone emotional. I think that's a very successful communication that's changed atmosphere in the room, and finally we can achieve some consensus and to have these outcomes. So having said that, we have so much work to do, and we are, in China, we're working with WWF and other partners on communication. And what our key objectives is, first, to build a narrative and to build a shared vision that what it looked like in a carbon neutral future, and what we have to do to achieve this goal. We need to have this shared narrative, shared storyline, and shared vision for people to act in a holistic manner or coordinated manner, so everyone was engaged there. And the second area we are working is to train the journalists. We work with some media, yes, that's point. And we have some training for more professionals. And the third area is children and youth. And we also cooperate with some schools to make our next generation more aware of this challenge and to act. Thank you. Over to you. Okay.
Thanks very much for the invitation. So many reflections already based on the comments I've already heard, but I wanted to just very briefly say something about Carbon Brief's work. Carbon Brief was set up a bit over 10 years ago in the UK in response to what at the time was a very poor, low-quality coverage of climate science in particular. And the idea was to kind of correct that, provide a platform for scientists themselves to spell out their findings in a neutral place where they wouldn't be misquoted and so on. And since that time, through our work with our daily briefing newsletter, where we're tracking the media debate in particular very closely in the UK, but also internationally, including in China in recent years, we've seen a real shift in the way that climate change is covered. So from outright skepticism being quite common 10 years ago, that's now much less common, and we're now into this very much this debate around climate solutions. Lots of myths about heat pumps and electric vehicles, and that. So in a way, that's progress, but obviously, a lot still to do. One reflection I wanted to share was just about how much more climate communication is obviously needed, just through the medium of talking a bit about some recent prime ministers in the UK and potential future leaders. So Boris Johnson was infamously pretty much a climate skeptic while he was the mayor of London. He used to write about. He used to cite climate skeptic commentators in his newspaper columns. He then obviously went on as Prime Minister to become, rhetorically at least, a very strong supporter of climate action. He really got on board with this idea of the kind of clean tech revolution, green jobs and so on. Then in contrast, the current Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, by all accounts, the conversations I've had with his former advisors in the Treasury is that he really doesn't care about climate change. I mean, he kind of pays lip service to it, but it's been very interesting seeing his journey in recent months in the UK with the speech, very kind of deliberately trying to row back on, saying we're going slow on climate action. And then obviously in the lead up to COP28, trying to kind of show a good face. But the way that he's chosen to focus on nature rather than mitigation directly is quite telling, I think. It sort of speaks to what they internally think within the Conservative Party will play to their audience, where, you know, people are probably against net zero as this kind of concept they don't really understand, but they're very much in favour of nature. You know, they like that kind of thing. And then finally, with Keir Starmer, the Labour opposition leader, who may well be the next Prime Minister, again, rhetorically, he's, you know, got this strong mission on green investment, but again, according to people I've spoken with, doesn't have like a strong personal commitment to climate change. So that seems to me, that says something about a failure of climate communication. There's a real gap there that, you know, these top leaders in the UK just don't really get it. I think one of the things that I wanted to reflect on, Adil mentioned the idea about truth, and I think he had a particular take on that, but I think it immediately triggered in my mind the way that the climate communications debate has seen this, you know, almost kind of previewed the post-truth debates that we now have around politics more widely. We had, you know, the Brexit debate in the UK, and a lot of that was kind of post-truth. You know, the Brexit bus and the mysterious 350 million that we supposedly sent to the EU. It was nonsense, but so much of the way that the media has operated and the way that climate skeptics operate into the media were previewed through the climate debate in previous years. So that as a kind of a close media watcher, that's been fascinating to watch, but also quite wearing, quite depressing in a way to see it playing out again, you know, writ large across politics in general. Just wanted to finally reflect on our China project. You know, in recent years, with additional funding, Carbon Brief's been extending our coverage of China and attempting to kind of open out a window for a Western audience onto the Chinese media debate. And it's been quite interesting to see the ways that Chinese media is covering climate events, particularly extreme events, and actually not just in China, but in Western media as well, seeing the increasing links being made between climate change and floods, you know, heat waves and so on, becoming much more frequent that those direct links are being made. I'll pause there. So much more I could say, but I'll pass on.
Thanks for having me. This is my first COP. As an independent writer, especially on science fiction, my first came across climate change was back in 2006. I wrote a small piece entitled "The Smart Society," way before the smart weather become a real thing, a public topic in Beijing. So later on, like 10 years ago, I published my first novel, Waste Tide. It's talking about electronic waste in the near future China, based on a real location very close to my hometown, Guiyu. And back in the day, nobody really understand why you want to write a novel about electronic waste. So everyone read it into a cyberpunkish story. And it took 10 years to have the people, public, to aware this is the real thing. This is something invisible from our daily life. And after it got translated into a dozen of other languages, it became a global issue right now. So it's not only about a local narratives in China, but also universally exist in South Africa, India, Southeast Asia, and later on, like in 2018, Chinese government, like they launched the ban against the foreign waste, including electronic waste. And afterward, Philippines, they evoked the protest against the Canadian waste imported to Philippines. So I think this is so fascinating that communication, especially storytelling, is helping us, you know, especially for the youngest. So they kind of understand what is the real dynamic happening here, not only in the place they live, but also around the world. So last year, I published another book for kids. Like when I'm talking about kids, it's for K to 12. So it's about carbon neutrality. The title is Net Zero China. So basically, I use a very futuristic storytelling, like time traveling, a kid, a boy from recent China, from 21st century, maybe 2020 China, to 2060 to witness everything happening in carbon neutrality society and how to make it possible. So I think I got a lot of very positive feedback, and even like students from elementary school, they wrote like dozens or maybe hundreds of reviews on the book, and they talk about how they imagine the future of living, future of technology, and how they're gonna change their behavior, like their consumption, their lifestyle, etc., etc. That is really encouraging. And I can see how powerful communication, especially storytelling, is making a huge difference here. So I read a lot of like, reports from Chinese medias talking about climate change, but it's always in a very dry and policy-driven way. So, because I know the number, the views, the reposts, when all these medias talk about climate, it drops like this. So basically, I think they use the wrong way to communicate with the people. We need more individual, we need more emotional, even more, imaginary narratives to talk about climate. So yeah, so now I'm working with a lot of scientists, profession experts in the field. So basically there's science evidence and base as the foundation of my storytelling, so make it authentic and convincing. But also we need more artists from different mediums, like musicians, we need visual artists, even game developers, to put it into different kind of like mediums to engage with the people, especially the youth. So this is what I'm envision, like starting from here. So I'm so excited to share with you, and hopefully can have more discussion afterward. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm excited too, but seems we already only have 5 minutes left. 2 minutes. Actually, I had like other 7 questions in the outline, and have another 7 just after listening to you guys, and fantastic. But please give me the last chance to raise a question, because I think it's really important. After listening to you guys, the question is very simple. Who are the audience, and in terms of your own work, or in your opinion, who are the audience of the climate change communication? Very briefly.
Okay, I think it's everyone needs to mainstream climate consideration in every decision-making process.
So for Carbon Brief specifically, we have a very professional audience, so other journalists, policymakers, and so on. I think your comments really highlight to me the need for different communications for different audiences. We kind of need all of the different kinds for to reach all of the different people, because you need different means to do that.
I think to me, my audience is those who still hold on the belief that we have hope to change something before it's getting too late.
Thank you guys for sharing. But before we let you go, I would like to add another group of people, or the audience. We mentioned about Donald Trump, Boris Johnson. I do believe that they're also part of the audience too. They give us more opportunities to say something about climate change and make people actually have the interest to listen. So for the people who actually doubt or don't believe, or they just don't know what's happening, I think they're really important to the communication work. And also that's maybe lays at the heart of the communication work, because we want to tell people who don't know what is happening in this world. Thank you for everything. Thank you, guys.
Thank you, moderator. Thank you, panelists. Thank you very much. I'm terribly sorry I'm a poor time manager, so I'm a poor moderator. But your speeches and the conversations are really full of deep thinking, and embarrass me a lot. To briefly summarize, the side event, I just want to mention that one key point from your speeches today, shaping the public opinion is crucial in fighting climate change. It helps to build more ambitious and concrete actions, especially to the youth. Climate communication may differ from countries, cultures, but definitely we need to work together to achieve it. Thank you very much. Thank you for coming.